Hello, I hope you are well and you have a fantastic day. From the previous audiobook, my favorite part is: this is often distressing to a patient who is the lucky recipient of an exploding leg, especially if it was his arm that needed attention. This makes my face smile. Let's get to the second part of the article about orcs. Orc physiology. Quote, "Orc physiology is fascinating and terrifying in equal measure, demonstrating inhuman degrees of resilience to the point where they can withstand seemingly fatal wounds with little apparent long-term consequence. Indeed, orcs witness suffering fatal wounds in the midst of heavy fighting have often been observed again several days later, larger and stronger than they were before their injuries and with no sign of those wounds save for some largely superficial scarring." End of quote from Janetta Aurelius Thos, Adeptus Mechanicus xenobiologist. Orcs are green-skinned and red-blooded, a side effect of the symbiotic physiological and genetic relationship with fungi. Orcoid physique itself is so robust that it can withstand tremendous punishment. Orcs feel surprisingly little pain, even from the most grievous of wounds, enabling them to fight on whilst horrifically injured and even for a short while after being technically dead. It is most fortunate for the orcs that they can withstand such brutal physical punishment, since the pain boys operate on a generally 19th century level of surgical knowledge, unlike humans, though orcs are quite capable of being beheaded, having the head sewn onto a different body, and surviving the experience to fight again. It is believed by some who study these brutes, albeit from afar, that this goes some way to explaining the greenskins' ultra-violent sense of humor. As pain and fear mean little to them, they are highly curious and amused by the reactions of their weaker foes as they hack them apart, the screams of terror contrasting with a deep throaty rumbling that, on occasion, could be mistaken for laughter from the orcs and the snickering brethren. The greenskin regenerative process itself is so powerful that an orc who has been hacked to bits can simply be stitched back together, bewildered but ready to fight once more. Nothing but the most grievous wounds will put an orc down for long, and burning them to ashes reputed to be the only way to make absolutely sure that they are gone for good. A typical orc stands around the same height as an average human male, though he would be much taller were he to stand up straight instead of being hunched over, as is his normal stance, and his frame is extremely muscular and solid. An orc's arms are long and heavily thewed, knuckles almost scraping the floor as he lopes around, and his gnarled hands end in taloned fingers capable of tearing an enemy's throat out with ease. The skin of an orc is green and leather tough, and his body is dotted with scars, scabs, pockmarks and parasites. His skull is extremely thick, able to absorb impacts that would cave in a human head. His heavy brow shades blood-red eyes, afire with the need to kill. Jagged fangs jut from a heavy jaw that would not look out of place upon a far larger predator, and when an orc speaks, it is in a slow, gruff tone thick with saliva and guttural curses. His words are sparse, brutal and straight to the point. A particularly favored ingredient in their diet are squigs, short for squiggly beasts, a variety of symbiotic orcoid races about the size of a Terran house cat but legless. These include the Eaten squig, a limbless blob which feeds on fungus, the Growler squig, a legged variety used as a sheepdog for Gretchen, in the 3rd and 4th editions of Warhammer 40,000 referred to as a squighound, and available as an item of war gear. The Attack squig, a powerfully voracious little beast available as an item of war gear, and the Face-Eater squig, a ferociously toothed variety used both as a weapon and for entries in face-eating contests. The orc and the squig both open their mouths and bite, in a parody of a kiss. If the orc eats the squig, he wins. If he keels over backwards, he loses. There is also a larger subspecies of squig, called a squigoth, that ranges in size from about that of an elephant to a 60-plus foot monstrosity capable of stomping buildings into rubble. 60 foot is over 18 meters. Squigoths are used as pack animals and in combat as the carriers of mobile fortresses. Orks grow all through their lives. The effect is particularly notable in successful orks. As the ork survives combats and wins trophies, the respective other orks will produce in him an effect somewhat similar to adolescence in the human male. He puts on muscle, becomes more aggressive and assertive, and generally throws his weight around. If he wins the ensuing challenges to single combat, he may become a nob, a leader or chieftain of orks, noticeably larger and tougher than the average greenskin. Once he begins to grow, an ork will generally keep getting bigger and stronger until he is beaten by a bigger or more cunning ork. Warbosses and warlords, the rulers of continents and entire orkoid empires, respectively, are very large orks indeed. Flashgits, however, are a special elite type of ork typically armed with big shooters. Flashgits are obsessed with polishing the guns, and these orks are much larger than an average ork. They are likely nobs who have gathered into a group. Ork physiology is actually the complex interweaving of two symbiotic organisms that have been genetically linked by the greenskin's original creators. One strain is comparable to a terrestrial animal and the other to an algae or fungus living within the former's bloodstream and skin. An ork's animal cells carry the genetic information of only the individual's orkoid subspecies. But the fungoid component of their physiology possesses the genetic information that defines all the different varieties of orkoid, as well as the different odd boys, and it helps to heal wounds by providing greater biochemical energy supplies drawn from some form of biosynthesis when necessary. Ork biology lends itself well to combat. They're extraordinarily strong and tough and naturally good fighters, always looking for a scrap. There are two theories relating to why orks have this unique, hybrid physiology. The first is that they were adapted by their masters, who were in fact the present-day snotlings, a tiny alien race that soared to intelligence upon eating a particular species of mushroom, spread across the galaxy with the help of their less intelligent ork slaves, and were then deemed stupid again when the orks consumed all traces of the mushroom, which only grew on their home planet. The more modern imperial theory of ork origins holds that they're the Krork, created as a warrior race by the Old Ones, referred to in ork legend as the Brain Boys, in their wars against the Necrontyr and the Cetan. The fact that an entire ecosystem can be constructed of orkoids, and the complete war readiness from birth, suggests that this is the more likely of the two ork origin theories. In early forms of this theory developed by the Imperial Magi biologists, the Brain Boys were actually an orkoid subspecies, along with the Orks and the Gretchen. But they're now believed by most Imperial experts to be the reptilian Old Ones, who also created other psychic species like the Aeldari and the Ghazghkull during the Ancient War in Heaven. The Brain Boys apparently became extinct or simply disappeared from the galaxy for unknown reasons during the course of the War in Heaven. This theory holds that before they passed on, they genetically engineered the orks' DNA to include a techno-gene. This gene develops in orks as they grow, influencing their minds and releasing genetically encoded knowledge in a similar way that a human baby will reflexively hold its breath underwater or a horse can walk half an hour after being born. An ork's techno-gene gives it information on how to fight, operate weapons, and speak the ork language. Ork odd boy specialists such as mech boys and pain boys are the mechanics and surgeons of ork society and receive their knowledge through these techno-genes. This theory of ork origins holds that this was a deliberate measure to ensure that the orkoid race would survive in an incredibly hostile universe. Ork nature. Quote, "Orks is never defeated in battle. If we win, we win. If we die, fight and srit don't count. If we runs for it, we don't lose either, cause we can come back for another go. See." End of quote from Common Ork saying. Theories abound that orks harbor the genetic traits of both animal and fungal life forms, and that it is this unusual biology that gives an ork his remarkable constitution. Orks' green coloration could be explained, Imperial scholars suggest, due to some form of algae or green fungus that permeates the cellular makeup. Such a substance could break down and repair damaged tissue at an incredible rate, accounting in part for the orc's extremely durable metabolism. Those observers of other races who maintain this theory point to the fact that an orc's head can live for some time after being completely severed from the body. Indeed, operations to reattach these are a staple of many a painboy's repertoire. Staple being the operative word. Yet for all the questions that still hang over the greenskin race, what cannot be disputed is its relentlessly bloodthirsty nature. An invasion by orcs has been likened to an incurable disease by the Imperium's scholars. Once a world or star system has faced attack by the greenskins once, it will be ravaged by them time and again until it finally withers and dies. Even as a world's defenders are celebrating their first victory over the orc invaders, new tribes of greenskins will be multiplying in the dark and shadowed corners of the victorious world. At the same time, orc survivors will carry word with them through the void, spreading the tale of how good a fight a particular world put up. Keen to have a go themselves, fresh waves of orcs will soon descend upon the horrified defenders, often before the damage from the previous orc incursion has been put straight. These attacks will increase in severity, wave after wave of greenskins from space now supplemented by the tribes that have risen up from the world's own wilderness. The planet's populace will be overrun one stronghold at a time, drowning in a rising tide of roaring, battle-mad greenskins. The harder a planet's defenders fight back, the worse the predicament will become. Every orc slain makes way for two of its bellowing brethren, while every attack wave the defenders bloodily repulse just draws more enthusiastic greenskins down on their heads. In this way some worlds can become the unintentional focus of the WOG, the orcs' numbers and frenzy reaching critical mass as they fling themselves against the world's defenses time and again. Eventually the pressure from orc invaders both within and without becomes insupportable, leaving the defenders only two choices: stand and fight, dying to the last in the process, or flee with whatever they can salvage, leaving the stricken world to the orcs. Reproduction. Orcs have not only survived, they have prospered and are more numerous than even the myriad trillions of individuals who comprise humanity across the galaxy. This is due in part to how Imperial scholars now believe that they reproduce. Orcs release fungal spores which grow into a plant-like womb underground that nourishes the bodies of the various orcoid species. This is the entire basis of the orcoid ecosystem, producing first squigs, then snotlings who cultivate the squigs and the fungus they feed on, then Gretchen to build the greenskin settlements, and finally the orcs themselves. This means the orcs, wherever they go, will have an abundance of food, slaves and other resources, a moving orcoid ecosystem that supports them as they unleash their wargs. This also makes it extremely difficult to rid a planet of orcs, even if the initial invasion is defeated. Orcs release spores throughout their lives but release them massively at the moment of death. Without a nearby population of orcs, the alien fungus will eventually start the orcoid life cycle anew. Decades after weathering an orc-wog, settlements on a planet can find themselves faced with an unexpected attack from feral orc tribes coming out of the wilderness. The only way to effectively remove all of the orcs once they are on a planet is through planetary exterminators action. Orcoid subspecies. Gretchen. Although they possess similar physiology to the orcs, Gretchen are not as strong or as tough as their larger brethren. To compensate for this, the Gretchen possess an abundance of low cunning. Commonly known as grots to the orcs, Gretchen are even more numerous than orcs. They scurry around the larger greenskins on scrawny legs, and the grasping fingers snatch and steal from the unwary. Gretchen have large bulbous heads and white-hatted ears that flatten against the bald pates when they are afraid. Which is most of the time. Sharp fangs fill their jaws, ever ready to be sunk into the flesh of the weak or infirm, and malice gleams in their eyes whenever there is an opportunity for violence. The grots' large and protuberant noses give them an excellent sense of smell, their ears afford them a similarly advanced sense of hearing, and their eyesight is acute even in the dark. These traits, combined with a heightened instinct for self-preservation, mean that Gretchen can not only survive but even thrive in a society dominated by vicious predators. Some grots have the survival instinct honed to such a degree that they may possess a rudimentary sixth sense, or are naturally far more fortunate than they have any right to be. The grots improve the chances of survival further by exhibiting a fawning and obsequious nature to their orc masters. Though braver Gretchen will pull faces and make rude gestures behind the backs of the bigger greenskins, few are stupid enough to risk doing so openly. Grots are fast learners and quick to spot an opportunity, meaning that many wind up as assistants or servants to more important orcs like mech boys or nobs. Others will simply attempt to stay out of the orcs' way, whole groups of grots fashioning hideouts amid scrap piles or warrens of tunnels too constricted for orcs to squeeze the bulk down. When the time comes to go to war, the grots will be flushed out of these hidey holes en masse by the gnashing squighounds of the Runthards, or a few enthusiastic burner boys. On his own, a single Gretchen poses little threat to a human-sized adversary. However, if there is one quality the grots have in abundance, it is quantity. On the field of battle, the Gretchen advance in great mobs, firing volleys of scavenged ammunition from their poor-quality weapons. They then dive upon the fallen and tear them apart in the scrabbling haste to loot the corpses. Even the most accomplished enemy warriors have found their arrogance punctured when cornered by an entire mob of shrieking grots. They can prove especially dangerous during naval boarding actions, for while their orc masters tie up a ship's defenders in furious point-blank battles, the wily grots will avoid such bloody fighting like the plague. Instead, knots of Gretchen squirm through air ducts, sabotage or loot vital machine components, and overwhelm triage stations full of helpless, wounded combatants. When grots wreck a starship's void shield generatorium or burst from the ducts to overrun a vital choke point mid-battle, the foe learn to respect these nasty little greenskins in a hurry. In the Gork and Mork supplementary setting, it was revealed that snotlings are actually young Gretchen. The Gretchen originally were used in swarms as in Warhammer Fantasy and could even be fired out of a shock attack gun, but vanished from 41st millennium battlefields with the advent of the 3rd edition of the game. However, it is worth noting that the game Dawn of War, which is part of Warhammer 40,000 official continuity, features Gretchens as base builder scout units. Next subspecies is called snotlings. Snotlings, or snots, look like tiny, immature Gretchen. The scrawny limbs are too small to bear weapons larger or more complicated than shards of broken glass or chunks of scrap. Lacking the violent tendencies of their larger kin, they make for very poor soldiers indeed and are predominantly kept as little more than pets for their orc masters, although they make excellent ammunition for the strange weapon the orcs call the shock attack gun. Nonetheless, the snots do perform a valuable function in orcoid society. Snotlings cultivate the great patches of fungi that spring up around orc settlements. In this way, the snotlings provide food, drink and medicine for the rest of the greenskin race. Snotlings also look after the ferocious squiggly beasts that live in the orc cesspit, known to the orcs as the drops. Their natural affinity with these life forms is far greater than that of other greenskins. Helpfully, this means that in a day only a few dozen snotling attendants will be devoured alive by their ravenous charges. The snotling populations that spring up around orc settlements are monitored and cultivated by a caste of orcs known as Runthards. These grizzled and merciless slavers use a variety of methods to bully their charges into a state of anxious obedience, not least of which are the much-feared grotprod and the ferocious squighound. Next subspecies is called squigs. Squigs, or squiggly beasts, are an integral part of the mobile and incredibly aggressive orcoid ecosystem. The squigs eat the refuse of the orcs, not to mention local plants, animals, and quite often each other, and the orcs eat the squigs. There are many forms of squig, and each variety incorporates many subtypes. Mech boys squeeze viscous black lubricant from the snouts of oil squigs to keep gears and gubbins working. Pain boys use mending squigs to stitch wounds shut or suture limbs back in place. Eating squigs, parasite hunting squigs, bag squigs, even rare and bizarre sets of musical squig pipes all have their uses. Yet perhaps the most infamous squigs are the ravenous face biters, which the orcs use in the same way humans might use attack dogs. Little more than a snapping, drooling mouth on legs, these ferocious beasties are a sign of status, and many an orc warlord keeps a pet face biter squig that dines upon those who have fallen out of favor with him. Other equally sharp-toothed squigs grow and breed in the sprawling cesspits of the orc settlements, lending an air of unpredictability and excitement to even the briefest trip to the drops. Orc philosophy. Quote, "The orcs are the pinnacle of creation. For them, the great struggle is won. They have evolved a society which knows no stress or angst. Who are we to judge them? We Eldar who have failed, or the humans on the road to ruin in the turn? And why? Because we sought answers to questions that an orc wouldn't even bother to ask. We see a culture that is strong and despise it as crude." End of quote from Uthan the Perverse, Aeldari philosopher. Orcs have but one philosophy: might makes right. They believe that the weak must suffer the rule of the strong. Over the countless millennia in which the greenskins have waged their wars, not one orc has ever doubted this for a single moment. This unshakable self-belief is perhaps the most dangerous quality of the orcs, for they will never give up until they plunge the galaxy into an eternal war. The orcs rule the barbaric civilization with an iron fist. Ugly and violent creatures, they are the dominant life form of a race that includes the smaller Gretchen and Snotling subspecies. Orcs see themselves as the toughest race in the galaxy, mightier by far than humans, Eldar or Tau. To prove the point, the orcs are more than willing to fight and kill everything that crosses the path. One of the greatest strengths the orcs possess is the simplicity with which they approach their existence. For an orc, the universe is an incredibly straightforward place, free of the angst and worry that plagues most other races. Orcs do not try to influence their own destiny and get frustrated when plans do not work out as expected. They do not look for something to blame, except perhaps the nearest Gretchen or a hated rival tribe, and certainly do not reflect on weaknesses in their own way of doing things. They just try again a different way, usually because they have forgotten how they did it the last time. Thus the orcs make remarkable progress by trial and error, without counting the cost. Meanwhile, other intelligent races steeped in high-flown philosophy fall into the same traps time and again, doomed to stagnate and decline, unless of course they are first conquered by the orcs. So long as the average orc has someone to fight, someone bigger than him to tell him who to kill next, and someone smaller than him to beat up, he will know contentment. Orcs don't tend to go hungry, as they can eat virtually anything, even grots, snotlings, or one another at a pinch. Greenskins have no concept of cannibalism or the moral outrage that accompanies it, as it is only natural that the bigger orcs should live at the cost of those weaker than themselves. With war and killing as their only real motivators, most orcs have little interest in gathering material wealth or luxuries. The one exception to this is a desire to possess ever bigger and louder weapons and vehicles. An orc will go to almost any lengths to get his hands on a louder shooter or faster war buggy. He will obsess over its acquisition until the exact moment he has it, at which point his eye will stray to something even bigger. The Wog. Barbaric and savage, the greenskins spread across the galaxy like a viridian stain. They plagued the battlefields of the late 41st millennium in great numbers, overrunning any who stand before them in a torrent of bloodshed and usually mindless violence. An orc warg is war on an apocalyptic scale. Orcs beyond counting swarm from one world to the next. Whole civilizations are exterminated and defenders' armies laid to waste as the orcs plow ever onward in an unstoppable tide. Orcs need battle just as humans need food and drink. Due to their warlike nature, they constantly fight amongst themselves or launch piratical raids upon nearby enemies. Such conflicts tend to be small-scale or localized. They never really develop beyond random outbursts of violence and looting. However, orc populations can reach a critical mass that leads to a full-scale planetary migration. This is known as a warg, a crusade of pure aggression that crashes through star systems in an orgy of violence. Orc behavior is dominated by the warg, a gestalt psychic field they generate that affects the orc psyche, which allows orcs to instinctively recognize who is bigger, and therefore who is in charge, since might makes right in orc society. All orcs generate this field, and it grows stronger as the orcs enjoy themselves, generally while fighting, and as more of them congregate together in one geographical area. The warg helps give momentum to the orcs' planetary assault campaigns, which are also known as wargs. The orcs like to call a lot of things wargs. Such a warg is a cross between a holy crusade and a pub crawl, with a bit of genocide thrown in for good measure. Thousands of orcs will gather together, drawn to the power of a single dominant orc called a war boss or warlord if the warg is particularly massive, who is bigger and more intelligent than the orcs around him. Then the orcs will set off to find an enemy to fight and defeat. Orc wargs will sweep whole planetary systems away and destroy armies and fleets in tides of bloodlust and carnage, and only once the orcs have killed every available enemy will they start to fight amongst themselves again. The Imperium of Man's tech priests have theorized that this gestalt psychic field also has a telekinetic or quantum probabilistic effect, allowing the seemingly ramshackle and poorly designed orc technology to work as the greenskins expect. It is believed that the reason this hypothesis came into existence is that the Imperium adopted the Adeptus Mechanicus's religious belief that aspects of a universal motive force inhabits all technology, and that these machine spirits serve mankind at the command of the machine god. If this is the case, without a machine spirit, orc machines could not work, requiring some psychic cause to justify their often devastating effect. Furthermore, Mechanicus Janetta Lucas Anzian has noted that many orc-built weapons will not function at all unless wielded by an orcoid, possibly supporting this hypothesis. Gathering the warg. First and foremost amongst all of the orcoid instincts is the literal need for an orc to wage war. Orcs need war just as a human or Eldar needs food and water, and over the long millennia of their existence the greenskins have become very, very good at it. Due to their inherently aggressive nature, orcs constantly fight amongst themselves to prove who is the strongest, sharpening their inborn warrior skills and weeding out the weak, though this process usually poses little threat to the larger galaxy. However, orc populations can reach a form of critical mass that can unleash a full-scale interstellar migration of greenskins. This violent migration and the planetary assaults that result from it is what Imperial savants refer to as a warg, a crusade of pure aggression that crashes through multiple star systems in an absolute orgy of fury and violence. A warg usually starts small, perhaps even as small as a single orc, who is visited by the orcoid deities Gork and Mork with dreams of great carnage. He will impart this vision to others of his kind through repeated blows to the head, or, if he is of a more intellectual bent, he will build a great orc war machine like a gargant that is the very image of his savage gods. Rumors of the coming warg will spread through the local orcoid society and the orcs begin to unite. New war bands join the growing throng with every passing day. An Ork war boss will fight his way to the top of the hierarchy of this growing greenskin horde and earn the status of a warlord, adding the armies of those clans he conquers to his own horde. As news of his new position spreads, the trickle of Ork reinforcements will grow into a green flood. Ork mechs will begin to collaborate on more and more outlandish projects, building ever larger war machines and weapons for the Warg. Smoke-belching mobile fortresses and titanic war engines are cobbled together out of nothing more than heaps of scrap metal and the always heavy-handed enthusiasm of the greenskins. Another side effect of the growing Gestalt psychic energy of the Warg. With each victory, the new war boss legend grows, and more followers flock to his blood-soaked banner. As he fights to retain command of his ever-growing horde against a constant stream of challenges, he will subsume the armies of those he conquers into his own tribe, and as news of his prowess spreads ever further, the trickle of reinforcements becomes a green flood. Drawn in by the war boss reputation, Ork mechs will start to collaborate on more and more outlandish projects as the Warg grows, building even larger war machines and guns. Smoke-belching mobile fortresses and titanic engines of battle are cobbled together out of nothing more than scrap metal and heavy-handed enthusiasm. Gorkanauts and Morkanauts appear in growing numbers, their pilots seeking out the Warg with a feverish intensity. Whole mobs of mech boys raise towering scaffolds within which stompers and even gargants start to take shape, these mighty effigies igniting some primitive drive within the minds of the Orks who see them, causing the flow of Warg energy they subconsciously generate to reach fever pitch. At this stage, there is still much rivalry between the various clans and tribes, and each will strive to outdo all the others in terms of the sheer destruction that can be wrought by its war machines. Those mechs without the resources to construct stompers and gargants will instead create mobs of clanking killer cans and death dreads, or battle wagons from which the war bosses can lead their armies to war. Soon the emergent Warg begins to span worlds instead of just continents. Entire native populations are forced into slavery merely to manufacture ammunition for the Horde's guns. Crude factory ships and war hulks are bashed into shape, the better to transport the Ork armies into battle. When the lure of imminent bloodshed can be resisted no more, the deadly fervor washing through the Horde overflows. Teeming Ork armies mass and swell with a roar like savage oceans, and the skies fill with crude and bulky Ork space-faring vessels. Whilst these masterworks of destruction take form, even more greenskins are drawn towards the Horde by the impending promise of these massive war engines' use and the exciting carnage they will reap. Most of the Ork boys of the Horde simply relish the chance to get into a really good fight. But those amongst the number who dream of becoming part of a truly awesome vista of destruction often choose the roles of crewmen and gunners on mobile battle fortresses and stompers. There is always a great deal of continued rivalry between the clans and tribes of Warg, and each strives to outdo all the others in the sheer killiness of their war machines. Those mechs without the resources to construct towering stompers or gargants, the Ork equivalents of Imperial Titans, instead create mobs of killer cans and Ork dreadnoughts, banding the creations together to form armies of mechanical savages that dwarf the mobs they march beside in size and power. Others build the fleets of fighters, fighter bombards and bombards that are laden with guns and bombs that will assault the foes from the air once the battle begins. The grand musters that precede a full-scale Ork invasion are an awe-inspiring sight. As the Orks gather for battle, smoke from thousands of oily engines fills the sky. The ground trembles beneath great wheels, tracks and the thunderous strides of towering gargants. Armies of greenskins stretch across the horizon, raising the banners high to proclaim their reputations and allegiances, their war cries audible for miles around. Looming Gorkanauts and Morkanauts, bizarre artillery pieces and force field generators chug, clank and buzz amidst the green throng. Armadas of rusty vehicles raise roiling thunderheads of dust into the atmosphere, while stacker jets roar overhead leaving contrails of filthy smoke. Speed freaks rev their engines, and the boys fire their guns into the air as a carpet of Gretchen spreads out in front of the army. Eventually, the battlefield is barely visible beneath the endless sea of green, each orc warrior certain that the ground will soon be stained red. Here the power of the warg is palpable as a wave of raw aggression, and the orcs believe Gork and Mork are gazing eagerly down from the warp to see how their warriors will fare. Then as one, with an almighty bellow, the orcs surge forwards, and another world is plunged into unending war. Those greenskins that do not aid in the construction of the warg's war machines seek out like-minded fellow orcs who fight in the manner that most appeals to them. The orcs call these groups cults, of which the vehicle-obsessed cult of speed is the most widespread and well-recognized in the Imperium, though by no means the only cult that exists in orc society. The Stormboys and Flashgits also represent cults, while those orcs who are unusually sensitive to the growing pool of Gestalt psychic energy surrounding a gathering warg may become Mad Boys. Hundreds of other orc war bosses will add their own armies to the cause of a new warg as the greenskin assault begins to spread across whole star systems rather than just a single world. Entire native planetary populations are forced into slavery to their new greenskin masters to manufacture ammunition for the Horde's guns and other materiel that the warg requires. Crude factory ships and war hulks are bashed together to produce further transports for the Horde, while a truly large warg may ultimately infest a space hulk to move from world to world or even hollow out asteroids and create the massive spaceborne orc fortresses known as Orks. When the lure of battle can no longer be resisted, the warg's savagery reaches a fever pitch that can no longer be contained save by the spilling of blood in vast quantities. The orcs who launch a warg generally have little in the way of a coherent combat doctrine like the other major intelligent species of the galaxy. Their only goal is destruction and mayhem in as large a quantity as they can muster. The orcs are a plague upon the other civilisations of the universe, a race of genetically engineered bioweapons whose true purpose was lost eons ago but who still carry on the fight against anyone, at any time, for no reason other than their own joy in destruction and slaughter. Once an orc warg has gathered, with one almighty bellow to the heavens from millions of orc throats, another world will be plunged into unending war beneath a surging green skin tide. The Great Warg. It is generally thought within the Imperium that over the last century or so, the orcs have become even more aggressive and warlike than ever before, and the numbers of wargs being recorded in all 5 segmentums is increasing. The Imperium has long theorized that the greenskin race possesses low-level background psychic abilities, a kind of Gestalt warp resonance. Orcs, of course, neither know nor care about such things. Yet as warp space becomes more turbulent, so the orcs too are becoming ever more belligerent. This rise in new wargs has been most notable around warp space anomalies and regions plagued by warp storms, with hundreds of greenskin invasion forces emerging from these areas every Terran year. Members of the Inquisition's Ordo Xenos have noticed a trend in the translations of glyph sequences found in orc camps, which speak increasingly of dark call of dark gods, a phenomenon felt most keenly by the nomadic Gork and Mork pilots. The emergence of weird boys seems to be increasing exponentially also, with many claiming that they see visions sent by Gork and Mork. On thousands of worlds the ominous silhouettes of gargants rise against the war-torn skies. The orcs' foes can only watch in horrified bewilderment as the phenomenon known as the Great Warg sees the greenskins flooding across the galaxy in numbers never before witnessed, slaughtering everything in their path as they go. Warg organization. Orcs gather into various levels of an organization. The first is the mob, a squad-level unit of orcs with similar ideas of how to act on the battlefield, generally led by a nob, short for noble, but pronounced nob. A number of mobs will gather together into a warband, which is roughly equivalent to an Imperial Guard company, although with a greater variation in size and strength, led by a warboss. The largest Ork organizational unit is the tribe or the clan, a group of numerous warbands all under the command of a warboss. Different tribes can be united by a powerful warboss known as a warlord when he raises a wug. Ork religion. The Orks are a powerful force in the universe. A highly prolific species, they are able to expand and prosper effortlessly in comparison to the other civilizations who struggle even for simple survival. The Ork character traits have a reflection in the warp just like the impulses and emotions of humanity and the Aeldari. These traits are made manifest in the belligerent Ork gods known as Gork and Mork. The Orks say that Gork is brutal but Kunan, and Mork is Kunan but brutal. Gork and Mork are divine powerhouses, deities so strong they are never truly defeated. They simply shrug off the attacks of other gods with a raucous laugh. Gork grins, bares his long teeth and lands a mighty blow on his adversary's head with a spiked club the size of a comet. Mork, always the sneaky one, waits until his foe isn't looking before clobbering him with a low blow. An idea of the appearance of the Ork gods can be gained from looking at Ork gargants and stompers, mighty war machines constructed in the image of Gork, or possibly Mork. An idea of the appearance of the Ork gods can be gained from looking at Ork gargants and stompers, mighty war machines constructed in the image of Gork, or possibly Mork. The mech boys create these titanic engines of war to reflect the essence of Orkiness in mechanical form, and as such they serve as potent religious idols. To the Orks, these clanking behemoths behave very much like the gods, lumbering about and leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. They go where they please, and never shun a fight. The aspects of Gork and Mork likewise evoked by the Gorkanaut and Morkanaut. These huge armored war suits are intended as a tribute to and imitation of the chosen god all in one, and the pilots frequently gripped by visions of Gork, or possibly Mork, urging him on during the heat of battle. As the apocalyptic designs of the Chaos Gods approach fruition, the immaterial realm is roused to ever greater fury. So it is that Gork and Mork fight all the harder against the demonic tides washing about the fleet. The Ork gods' joyful battle lust echoes into the material universe, their roars clearer to the greenskins with every passing day. The weird boys claim that Gork and Mork are calling all their children to the last mighty battle, for the Great Wug, the everlasting war, is upon them. The priesthood of these gods has no representation, although the infamous Goth's warlord Ghazghkull Uruk Thraka claims to be receiving visions from both. Also, there has been some mention of Yellers, the Ork version of a priest, although they are not seen in-game. In earlier versions of Warhammer 40,000, a third god, Ork, appeared but has since been dropped from the lore. Orks generally tend to distinguish between Gork and Mork as one being mean, and the other being cunning. Some religious divisions lie in determining who is meaner, another factor preventing Orks from being united. It is doubtful if the distinction between Gork and Mork means anything in Ork culture, as long as it allows them to bash something. Perhaps Gork and Mork are actually truly only one god with two guises, the twin halves of the Ork psyche. Ork currency. Orks use the teeth, or rather, the teeth, as currency. This is quite a natural solution to inflation and income support, as Orks go through teeth in a similar manner to sharks, replacing them quite frequently, and Ork teeth do degrade over time, so it is impossible to hoard them. This keeps prices constant, ensures all Orks have at least some access to money, and allows constant values to be placed on commodities. A tooth will buy a good squig pie and a tankard of fungus beer, while a bag of teeth will buy a cheap war buggy. A big flashy battle wagon could cost a war boss hundreds of teeth. This system also promotes aggression, as all an Ork needs to make more money is to knock teeth out of another Ork's head and then collect them for himself. Ork language. Orks generally speak a debased and primitive form of Imperial Low Gothic, with mangled pronunciation and more than a few Orc words mixed in. Therefore, it is possible for Orks and humans to communicate, although rarely easy. Most Orks communicate through this bastardized form of Low Gothic, although the pronunciation and grasp of grammar is uniformly atrocious. However, a few extraordinary Orks like the Warlord, Ghazghkull, Uruk, Thraka have managed to master High Gothic. The Orc written language is a crude glyphic script. The core of the script is composed of glyphs that indicate clan, common Orc concepts, and elements of Orc names. This is augmented by phonetic symbols which can be used to write most Orc words, along with any alien names or words. Orc technology. Orc technology appears ramshackle and slapped together. It often is, but is as potent as any weapons used by the Imperium or other intelligent species. Orc technology is characterized by a constant stream of poorly thought-out experimentation and attempts to constantly outdo the competition to build the biggest gun, the largest gargant, a huge land-based combat walker, or the fastest war buggy. And also mainly by the fact that in many cases the only reason it works at all is because of the Orc's latent psychic powers. This means that if enough Orcs think it will work, it usually will. Many a tech marine has opened an Orc slugger to find it to just be a box with bolts and bits of metal in it. Therefore, Orc technology is not uniform, lending Orc warbands a cobbled-together, slapdash and random appearance. Orc mechanics, mech boys, are specialists in the field of producing powerful force fields that can protect against damage and battlefield repairs. They can salvage almost any burnt-out wreck, and many Orc vehicles have been reported destroyed dozens of times, only to be cobbled back together, given a fresh lick of paint, if even that, and sent back into the fray. The tough, resilient nature of Orcs means they accept crude bionics, transplants, and other medical shenanigans being performed on them with ease. Some Orcs build inventions that fly for airborne bombardment, which they call fighter bombers, while some Orcs loot vehicles from their enemies. Orc weapons include sluggers, choppers, burners, Orc flamers, and combi weapons like the shooter, scorcher, rocket launcher, and the twin-linked shooter. They also make use of stick bombs, which are crude Orc grenades. However, due to the highly experimental and competitive nature of Orc technology, some weapons and war gear they have created are as effective and deadly as they are unique and random. Prime examples are the shock attack gun, a gun built by an experienced, that is, lucky to be alive mech boy, called a Big Mech, which creates a tunnel through the warp itself, which the Orcs have put to good use by firing snotlings, and occasionally the Big Mech firing the gun, at the enemy. The downright dangerous Deathcopters, crude helicopters, fitted with oversized weapons, blades and bombs and piloted by renegade speed freaks for whom the ground is a bit tame, and the shoulder-mounted Death guns. Created when an Orc approaches a mech with some of the enemy's guns he found on the battlefield, and asks the mech to make them more killy. End. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this audiobook, leave a comment and like. I have warm feelings to the Orcs since now. Visit my Facebook, Blogspot or Patreon. Have a nice day, bye bye.